1 Kings Chapter 21. And after these things, it so happened that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard, which was in Jezreel, alongside the palace of Ahab the king of Samaria. And Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, Give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, for it is nearby, alongside my house. And I will give you in its place a better vineyard than it, or if it seems good to you, I will give you its value in money. And Naboth said to Ahab, Jehovah forbid that I give the inheritance of my fathers to you. And Ahab came into his house sullen and vexed because of the word that Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him, for he had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he lay down on his bed and turned away his face and would eat no food. And Jezebel his wife came to him and said to him, Why is your spirit so sullen that you will not eat any food? And he said to her, Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, Give me your vineyard for money, or else, if it pleases you, I will give you another vineyard for it. And he said, I will not give you my vineyard. And Jezebel his wife said to him, Do you now exercise sovereignty over Israel? Rise up, eat some food, and let your heart be glad, I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. And she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal, and she sent the letters to the elders and to the nobles who dwelt with Naboth in his city. And she wrote in the letters, saying, Proclaim a fast, and set Naboth at the head of the people. And put 2 worthless fellows before him, and they shall testify against him, saying, You cursed God and the king. Then carry him out, and stone him that he may die. And the men of his city, the elders, and the nobles who dwelt in his city, did according to the instructions that Jezebel had sent to them, as it was written in the letters that she had sent to them. They proclaimed a fast, and set Naboth at the head of the people. And the 2 worthless fellows came and sat before him, and the worthless men testified against him, against Naboth, in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth cursed God and the king. And they carried him out of the city and stoned him with stones, and he died. And they sent word to Jezebel, saying, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. And when Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, Rise up and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive but dead. And when Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab rose up to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. And the word of Jehovah came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Rise up and go down to meet Ahab the king of Israel, who is in Samaria. He is now in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone down to take possession of it. And you shall speak to him, saying, Thus says Jehovah, Have you killed and also taken possession? Then you shall speak to him, saying, Thus says Jehovah, In the place where the dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, the dogs will lick up your blood also. And Ahab said to Elijah, Have you found me, my enemy? And he said, I have found you because you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of Jehovah. I am now bringing evil upon you, and I will take away your posterity and will cut off from Ahab every male, bond and free, in Israel. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah because of the provocation by which you have provoked me to anger and caused Israel to sin. And concerning Jezebel, Jehovah also spoke, saying, The dogs will eat Jezebel by the rampart of Jezreel. Him of Ahab's who dies in the city, the dogs will eat, and him who dies in the field, the birds of heaven will eat. Indeed there was none like Ahab, who sold himself to do what was evil in the sight of Jehovah because Jezebel his wife urged him on. And he acted very abominably in going after idols, according to all that the Amorites did, whom Jehovah had dispossessed before the children of Israel. And when Ahab heard these words, he tore his clothes and put sackcloth upon his flesh and fasted, and he lay in sackcloth and went about carefully. And the word of Jehovah came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Do you see how Ahab humbles himself before me? Because he humbles himself before me, I will not bring the evil upon him in his days, in his son's days I will bring the evil upon his house. 1 Kings Chapter 22. And they continued 3 years without war between Syria and Israel. Then in the 3rd year Jehoshaphat the king of Judah came down to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said to his servants, Do you know that Ramoth-Gilead is ours, and yet we keep quiet without taking it out of the hand of the king of Syria? And he said to Jehoshaphat, Will you go with me into battle at Ramoth-Gilead? And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I will be as you are, my people will be as your people, my horses, as your horses. And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, Ask today, I beg you, for the word of Jehovah. And the king of Israel assembled the prophets, about 400 men, and said to them, Shall I go against Ramoth-Gilead to battle, or shall I refrain? And they said, Go up, and the Lord will give it into the king's hand. But Jehoshaphat said, Is there not yet another prophet of Jehovah here, that we might inquire of him? And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, There is yet one man by whom we may inquire of Jehovah, but I hate him, for he prophesies no good concerning me, but evil. It is Micaiah the son of Imlah. And Jehoshaphat said, Let not the king say so. Then the king of Israel called a certain officer and said, Quickly bring Micaiah the son of Imlah. Now the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah were sitting, each on his throne, arrayed in their robes, on the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets were prophesying before them. And Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah made for himself horns of iron, and he said, Thus says Jehovah, With these you will push the Syrians until you have destroyed them. And all the prophets prophesied so, saying, Go up to Ramoth-Gilead, and succeed, for Jehovah will deliver it into the king's hand. And the messenger who went to call Micaiah spoke to him, saying, See, the words of the prophets, being of one accord, seem good to the king. Let your word, I beg you, be like the word of one of them, and speak good. And Micaiah said, As Jehovah lives, that which Jehovah says to me, that will I speak. And when he came to the king said to him, Micaiah, shall we go against Ramoth-Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain? And he said to him, Go up, and succeed, for Jehovah will deliver it into the hand of the king. And the king said to him, How many times shall I adjure you to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of Jehovah? And he said, I saw all Israel scattered upon the mountains, like sheep that have no shepherd. And Jehovah said, These have no master, let each of them return to his house in peace. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, Did I not tell you that he prophesies no good concerning me, but evil? And Micaiah said, Hear therefore the word of Jehovah, I saw Jehovah sitting upon his throne, and all the host of heaven standing by him, on his right hand and on his left. And Jehovah said, Who shall entice Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead? And one said after this manner, and another said after that manner. And there came forth a certain spirit and stood before Jehovah and said, I will entice him. And Jehovah said unto him, How? And he said, I will go forth and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, You shall entice him and surely prevail. Go forth, and do so. So now Jehovah has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets, and Jehovah has spoken evil concerning you. Then Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah approached and struck Micaiah upon the cheek and said, Which way did the Spirit of Jehovah pass from me to speak to you? And Micaiah said, You will see on that day when you go from room to hide yourself. And the king of Israel said, Take Micaiah and carry him back to Amon the governor of the city and to Joash the king's son. And you shall say, Thus says the king, Put this man in prison, and feed him with the bread of affliction and with the water of affliction, until I come in peace. And Micaiah said, if you return in peace at all, Jehovah has not spoken by me. And he said, Listen, O peoples, all of you. And the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah went up to Ramoth-Gilead. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and enter into the battle, but you put on your robes. And the king of Israel disguised himself and went into the battle. And the king of Syria commanded the 32 captains of his chariots, saying, Fight neither with small nor great, but with the king of Israel only. And when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, Surely this is the king of Israel. And they turned against him to fight, and Jehoshaphat cried out. And when the captains of the chariots perceived that he was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. And a man drew a bow at random and hit the king of Israel between the scale armor and the breastplate. And the king of Israel said to his charioteer, Turn your hand, and drive me out of the camp, for I am wounded. And the battle increased that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot before the Syrians, and he died in the evening, and the blood of the wound ran out into the hollow of the chariot. And the cry went throughout the army at the going down of the sun, saying, Every man to his city, and every man to his own land. And the king died and was brought to Samaria. And they buried the king in Samaria. And someone washed the chariot in the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked his blood, where the harlots bathed, according to the word of Jehovah, which he had spoken. And the rest of the acts of Ahab and all that he did and the ivory house that he built and all the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? And Ahab slept with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son reigned in his place. And Jehoshaphat the son of Asa began to reign over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab the king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. And he walked in all the way of Asa his father, he turned not aside from it, doing what was right in the sight of Jehovah. Nevertheless the high places were not removed, the people offered sacrifices and burned incense still on the high places. And Jehoshaphat made peace with the king of Israel. And the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat and his might that he showed and how he warred, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? And the remainder of the male cult prostitutes, which were left in the days of his father Asa, he put away from out of the land. And there was no king in Edom, a deputy was king. Jehoshaphat made ships of Tarshish go to Ophir for gold, but they did not go, for the ships were wrecked at Ezion-Geber. Then Ahaziah the son of Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, Let my servants go with your servants in the ships. But Jehoshaphat was not willing. And Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David his father, and Jehoram his son reigned in his place. Ahaziah the son of Ahab began to reign over Israel in Samaria the 17th year of Jehoshaphat the king of Judah, and he reigned 2 years over Israel. And he did what was evil in the sight of Jehovah and walked in the way of his father and in the way of his mother and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. And he served Baal and worshipped him and provoked Jehovah the God of Israel to anger, according to all that his father had done.